Welcome back to Dornsife Dialogues. At the beginning of every year, we hear a lot about habits, vows to purge bad ones, jumpstart good ones. And right about now, at the end of January, is the time when many of those good intentions tend to make their way onto next year's list. But 2020 was no ordinary year. The pandemic has prompted many of us to change the way that we live. And in the process, many people have developed new habits, some for better and some for worse. On the other hand, research by our guest, Professor Wendy Wood, has revealed that when people are distracted or feeling particularly tired or overwhelmed, they tend to fall back on old habits. So we're going to hear from Wendy today about how to tap the science of habits to achieve our goals and realize greater success. Wendy is a research psychologist who has devoted her career to understanding how habits work. She has over 100 scientific articles published and recently published a book, Good Habits, Bad Habits, which earned rave reviews, including from me. I don't think I told her that I read it this summer and loved it. She is among the world's top experts in the field and has served as an advisor to the World Bank, the Center for Disease Control, and to global businesses such as Procter & Gamble and Lever Brothers. Wendy's also received many honors for her research and teaching, including a Radcliffe Institute Fellowship and serving as the 2018 Distinguished Chair of Behavioral Science at the Sorbonne. We have with us also our moderator this afternoon, Tara Parker Pope. Tara is a founding editor of The Well, the New York Times consumer health site. Among her many awards, she's won an Emmy for the Well video series, Life Interrupted. She's authored 3 books, and she's been a featured guest on shows including Dateline, Anderson Cooper, The Today Show, and Good Morning America. So many thanks to both Tara and Wendy for joining us for what I have no doubt will be an engaging conversation. I'll turn the program over to the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I was invited to have this conversation with you, I was really excited about it, Dr. Wood, because I often will call you at the last minute when I'm working on a story, frantic, I need help, I need guidance, science, advice. And we end up having these great conversations, and I get a little frustrated because I can only share, part of it with my readers for the story. So I think this is going to be really fun to get to talk to you and have everyone out there. We've got almost 400 people with us right now, and they're still joining. So I think this is going to be a fun conversation. And I would just encourage everyone who's listening to please jump in with your questions. I see a few things are coming into chat. Please use the Q&A function. That's what I'm going to be watching. So if you want to ask a question as we're talking, just jump in. I'll do my best to get to it. You will definitely make the conversation better. So please jump in and take part. I have a question already. Where will the Facebook Live be posted? This will be posted tomorrow when it's over. So we'll wrap up with that later. But Dr. Wood, how are you? How is the pandemic treating you?
Like everybody, it disrupts our habits, and we're now looking, we hope, to actually getting back to normal life. So we're going to have to start thinking in a month or 2 or 3 about which habits we want to keep and which ones we maybe want to lose. So in transition, in a state of transition like everybody.
But I think this might present an opportunity. Is that right? Times of disruption and change, our lives have been just, so changed. Do you think there's an opportunity here for us to look at our lives, to evaluate, and to make some positive changes?
Absolutely. We have been living somewhat differently than before, and has many challenges. I don't get to teach students in the classroom. We don't get to go outside, be with our friends, be with our families in ways that we normally do. But we've had chances to do other things. So there's some evidence that people are cooking more at home now during the pandemic. And if you cook at home, you tend to eat more healthfully. So that's a positive change potentially that you might want to take with you after the end of the pandemic, and we can all get back to living our lives in a more familiar way, perhaps. There's also evidence that people have started gardening more, right? So they've started enjoying their gardens and spending more time outside doing those kinds of things. Hiking. People have started hiking more. These are all good things, many things we want to keep. So it's a chance to think about how to extend those changes that we've made back into life when it resumes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this has been a grand experiment, and a lot of people are noticing, maybe more than in the past, habits and changing habits. I know that for me personally, I was always sort of interested. We have a city bike. I don't know if every community has a city bike, but a bike that I can go put my credit card in and just bike around town, and I'd never used it. But during the pandemic, when everything shut down and we were fearful about getting in taxis, I wanted to go downtown, and it was the most freeing, liberating, amazing experience. This was when we were just pure lockdown. And I remember thinking, why didn't I try this before? But I'd never really been pushed to need the city bike, right? And I thought, well, this is interesting. What has changed in my life that has made me sort of more open to this idea? Now I use the city bike all the time. What do you think? I mean, is that something, do we sometimes make changes because we get a little push like that?
Absolutely. So I think in order to understand habits, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
And think about how our brains work, the neuropsychology behind habits. So we all think of our brain as sort of one thing, right? It's a unit that kind of works all in synchrony. And that's sometimes true. But more often, we actually have sort of different parts of our brain, different neural systems that have evolved, each sort of at different times in human history. And we've lost things, we've gained things over time, so that we have a learning system that's actually very similar to the way your dog learns things. It's the way whales learn things. All mammals share this habit learning system that just learns information slowly and incrementally over time through what you do. So it's not your decision making that changes your habits. Instead, it's your experience. And that's very unique to habit memories. And because we have those multiple neural systems all contributing to control our behavior, we have a variety of ways of responding, and habits are one of them. And they only integrate sort of with our thinking conscious self. And that's where we get into trouble. So your question about why haven't I made a decision to use a bike before this? Well, it's because you didn't have to. You had a habit to do something else. How did you used to get around? Did you use public transit?
Yeah, subway, exactly. And that's shut down.
Exactly. And now we're all afraid of contracting the virus if we go in closed spaces, as we should be. So that puts you in more of a decision-making mode where you have to rely on another part of your brain than your typical habitual way of doing things, and you had to make new decisions. And sometimes we have to be encouraged by external circumstances to do that. Because there's always a cost to thinking, right? It's tiring, and it requires effort. And these are not things that we always want to do. So habits are a way of sort of solving problems for ourselves in ways that have worked in the past. The subway always worked in the past, but now it doesn't. So you have to decide to do something else.
I think what's interesting every time I talk to you about habits, we have to sort of let go of this idea that we're in complete control, that we're deciding, and that just the decision alone is enough. I think that we often, we need to be reminded that this is a brain system, that these behaviors, come from a lot of, circumstances and places, and that just sort of, it's not just because I said, today I'm going to do this, that a lot of other things come into play to make it a habit. I find that hard to let go of. that I'm not in complete control of this and that I can't just get there through just sheer force of will.
You're not the only one. I think that that's what fuels a lot of New Year's resolutions. We think that this time we can do it if we just commit ourselves enough, if we're certain enough, if we think through the reasons why, exert enough willpower. We think all of those things should work. And to the self, the parts of our neural systems that we're aware of, that's makes sense. But there's this other sort of nonverbal outside of awareness system, the habit system, that has a very different logic. And yes, some of our research right now is looking at people's understanding of their habits. And we find that you're not the only one who likes to think you're in control. Everybody does. And even for relatively routine behaviors, like drinking coffee in the morning, people still think they're making choices and making decisions when we can show that their behavior is really just being cued automatically and they're not even thinking about what they're doing. So they can't be making decisions, but they think they are. And that's functional, right? It gives us a sense of control. Is not a bad thing. We should all have a strong sense of control over our behavior. But the trick is to understand the limits of that control and what it's good for and what it's not.
So why do you think, let's step back a little bit. I see some questions coming in and I want to talk with you about how we can form new good habits and break old bad habits. But why do you think it is that, you've written a great book. Let me show it to everybody. You should, we'll talk about this book, but Good Habits, Bad Habits, everybody should run out and go buy it. So it will be very helpful to you. There are other books about habits. There's a lot of conversation. There's always columns. Why are we so interested in this topic?
Well, just before this morning, I had a lab meeting with undergraduates, graduate students. We meet once a week and talk about research, get projects going. And so I asked them that. I said, why are you interested in being part of the habit lab that I run? What is it about habits that's so intriguing? And the answer was very much sort of related to your comment, Tara, about control. That habits are something we don't really understand. And they all have habits. We all have habits that we're trying to control in some way. So they want strategies. They want to understand, so what is this thing that makes me keep procrastinating or keep looking at my phone so much more than I want to, which are the two habits that kept coming up this morning with my lab meeting. That it doesn't quite feel like it's under control, but they think it should be. So it's a little confusing. And that's just part of what habits are. They're not accessible to consciousness, which is why I think people are really interested in them. They drive a lot of our behavior. My research has suggested that over 40% of our behavior is done on a regular basis without even thinking about what we're doing. And that is a marker of a habit. So they're pervasive, but we don't understand them very well. And we can't, because we are, in fact, not able to access our habits in the same way that we experience our thoughts and our feelings, our desires, our motives. We're used to all those things, but you can't experience a habit. And it's that unknowability, I think, that attracts students to my lab and that gets people wanting to read about them more. Yeah.
How do you account for differences? I mean, I will have friends who seem super, I'm going to, again, use these terms because I think I'm bringing these biases to this conversation. My dog is barking, I'm sorry. I have some people in my life who are super disciplined. They really have no problem. Not my dog is obviously not disciplined, but other people who just have no problem making a change, starting to exercise, changing their diet, and other people struggle. Can you tell me how we can account for why some people can seem to form a new habit easily and gracefully, and while other people struggle?
Yeah. So we used to think that that was a marker of self-control, right? So some people just have really good willpower and they're able to exert it, change their behavior, and make it stick. And those are the people who are really good at pursuing goals. But we found in the last couple of years something really fascinating in psychology, and this is not my research, this is other people's, showing that what we thought was self-control is actually an understanding of how to form good habits. So people who score really high on self-control scales, there are scales to measure them, like personality scales. People who score really high on self-control scales actually rely on habit to meet their goals more than people who don't score as high. So it's as if people who think they have self-control and think they're in charge because they're scoring high on these scales, it's as if they have figured out how to form habits in a better way than other people. And so that may be what you're seeing, is it may be sort of an intuitive understanding of how to form habits. And as I said, habits don't form in the way we think they should. They don't form through decisions. Instead, they form through doing. So repetition is the basis of habit formation. Your habit memory picks up repeated behavior, things you do over and over again. And you have to repeat it a lot in order for it to become a strong habit memory. So each time you do something, you're incrementally strengthening that habit memory trace so that it will be slightly stronger next time. But it takes many repetitions for it to become strong enough for the behavior to become automated.
That's one of the questions I see in our chat. How long does it take? Can we put a number on it? A week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks before a habit becomes a habit, before sort of a goal or a desired behavior becomes a habit? Do we know how long it takes?
Well, because it's a learning system, things that are more complicated take longer to learn than things that are easier. There's a, so if your habit has multiple parts and requires a lot of adjusting, and it's going to take longer to learn. There's a sort of a meme out there that if you do something for 21 days, you're likely to form a habit. That didn't come from habit research, though. That comes from what we can tell, it comes from a book by a popular book that was published in the 1960s on how long it takes people to get used to a new image after some plastic surgery. So
Really?
it's not related to habit at all. But what we do know, I have a former postdoc who actually studied how long it takes for simple health behaviors to become habitual, in the sense that you do them automatically without really thinking about doing them, sort of like most of us drink coffee in the first thing in the morning. And what she found is that people who are doing these simple health behaviors every day for about 66 days, and when I say simple health behaviors, I mean things like take a walk after dinner, take your dog for a walk, Tara, having a glass of water with lunch, or having fruit for breakfast. Those are the kinds of simple health behaviors that she was that she was studying. And when people did them for about 66 days, they started to become pretty automatic, so they didn't have to struggle anymore. But a more complicated behavior like going to the gym that has multiple steps, that is just going to take longer to form into a habit.
But I think you're told the two things we just talked about have been really encouraging for me. Because one, I think we tend to think that self-discipline and willpower are just traits that people have. And what you told us is that maybe these people are just better at instinctively forming habits. And so if we can learn and educate ourselves and learn the steps it takes to form a habit, we can sort of replicate that. And so it doesn't feel quite as unattainable. And I know 66 days sounds like a long time, but it is a number at least. And it's, for me, I think one of the mistakes we make in health and wellness is that we are really hard on ourselves. I will have a friend who will go for a week of no sugar, and then she has a cookie and she says, I'm a failure. And no, you're not a failure. You just had a cookie. It's okay. And maybe you weren't, just sort of cold turkey isn't the way to go. I think that 66 days, we need to remind ourselves these things take time. You're not going to achieve perfection overnight. And so for me, that's an encouraging piece of science to know that it takes time, it takes learning, but it is attainable with some level of commitment to the habit.
Exactly. And there's one even more optimistic insight there too, I think, which is in the study I was talking about habit formation and how long it takes. If people quit for a couple of days and didn't do it, when they started up again, the habit strength was just about as strong as when they quit.
Oh.
And that says something about habit memories and how slow they are to change, that you can not do something for a couple of days and that habit memory will still be there ready for you when you get back to whatever behavior you're trying to form into a habit.
So I think that's also interesting because I know for a while my dog has decided to make as much noise as possible since I'm on this call. The Whole30 program, they're very strict, and you need to be on Whole30, and if on day 25 you blow it, you have to start all over. And I find that so not helpful to people that are trying to, it's one day, so I like this sort of this idea that it's not all or nothing, that you can keep building on these habit memories. That seems like a really important piece of information to me, to remind ourselves.
I agree completely. And the challenge, I think, is that many of these health programs aren't really meant to form habits. So they're not informed by the science. They're informed by our decision making, by what we think should work, right? But when you pay attention to the habit science, there's actually a happier story. It's more forgiving.
I like that.
Decisions are sometimes, yeah.
I think that's such an important lesson when you're trying to make behavioral change, that you need to have some level of self-compassion. You need to have some level of forgiveness and understanding of human behavior so you can keep moving forward. Let's talk about, I want to get to some of these specific questions, but I think it would be good if we could help people understand the steps it takes to build a habit. So let's start with a good habit, something new that we want to do. What's a common thing that people might come to you and say, I want to start this new thing. I want to start this new habit.
Well, given that it's the new year, right? It's exercise, it's eating right, it's spending less, saving more. Those are the big New Year's resolutions that most people make. But, there's also, I want to be nicer to my partner. I want to be more understanding to my kids. I want to be more patient. All of these things are habits that you can develop. So in order to do that, let's take the exercise thing, for example. There's been a lot of work on exercise. So part of what we know about habit formation is that you are more likely to repeat a behavior and form a habit if you enjoy it in some way. And that sounds so obvious, right? It's hardly sounds like it's worth talking about, but there are a couple of reasons for this. And one goes back to neuroscience again. So when you do something that you find rewarding, that's fun in some way, or that makes you feel proud, it can be that kind of a reward. Then your brain releases the neurotransmitter dopamine. And dopamine does many different things in the brain, but one of the things it does is it helps to build habit memories. It ties together what you're doing in a specific context that got that reward. So that starts to form those habit memory traces that I was talking about. And that, in combination with you're just more likely to repeat the things that are rewarding, means that rewards are important for habit formation. So if your goal is to exercise, find something to do that you like to do, right? You don't want to try to force yourself to do something that is not enjoyable because you're not going to enjoy it. One of my favorite studies was done with New Year's resolutions, showing that it was actually done with people 3 months after the New Year. So a little bit later than now, but close enough. And people reported what their New Year's resolutions were. And then they indicated whether the resolution would be life-changing and important, and whether each resolution was rewarding and enjoyable. Right? And what the researchers were interested in is, what did people stick with out of these New Year's resolutions? What did they stick with? What was important? Because that's what we'd expect, right? They're New Year's resolutions. That's why we make them life-changing. Or did they stick with the ones that were fun? And as you probably have figured out by now, they stuck with the ones that were fun, which is not what you'd expect initially, because it's not why we make resolutions, but it is why we keep them. And that's because of the rewarding effects of dopamine that gets us to form a habit and stick with it.
So this is a little challenging though, because what if the thing you want to do is to diet or to lose weight or to do something most people don't think of changing your eating habits as fun, but is that the way to do it? Is it to find foods you love, they're also good for you, that can help you, eat a healthier diet, sort of a more positive eating approach? And I think that learning how to craft, thinking about your goal and what the achievable goal is and how to make that goal more likely to be successful feels like 50% of this. Like, you have to start in the right place. So how do you make some of these things that aren't so fun, how do you make them fun? Is it after you give yourself the reward? Like, where does the fun come in from trying to lose weight, for instance?
Yeah, well, let me clarify. The reward has to be immediate. So it can't be something that you give yourself at the end of a month of successful dieting or exercise. It has to be immediate in order to create that repetition and to activate dopamine. And you can choose the behavior wisely, choose something that does appeal to you, or you can figure out ways to make it appeal by adding other things. So with exercise, I used to run a lot and I loved running outside, but backs and knees don't last that long. So I'm now on an elliptical, and an elliptical is really the most boring thing in the world to do. But I figured out that I can read trash novels and watch stupid TV shows while I'm working out on the elliptical. I'm doing it at that point. I don't let myself do it otherwise. It's just, I don't have time. But I can easily justify it on the elliptical. So I've figured out how to make that fun in a way that has helped me make it into a habit. Food is more difficult because people think that what they eat is what they like, right? And that actually is true. It doesn't work necessarily in the reverse, that what they like is what they eat, because we all eat what's available in our current environment. We think that little kids that intrinsically like pizza and ice cream and maybe grilled cheese sandwiches. That's true in the US. That's what we give them. My friends in Europe, in Denmark, their kids like herring. They think that herring, pickled herring, is a comfort food for little children. It's really what we eat and what we like are very much dependent on what we're exposed to. So if you can figure out ways to encourage yourself to eat more fruits and vegetables and less other things, it really does make a difference.
I think this is good advice in terms of just making it a more positive experience, finding fruits and vegetables that maybe you haven't tried, maybe cooking with a friend, healthy meals with a friend to make it fun. I do think that you can make healthy eating and healthy living fun. I just don't necessarily think it's top of mind when we set these goals. I think we feel like there's got to be a little suffering, right? To form a new habit, I have to suffer.
Yeah, self-denial. We're big on self-denial. That's that Puritan. Yeah.
Yeah.
And self-denial is self-defeating. We know this. People ask to think of a white bear. Sorry, people ask not to think of a white bear. None of us think of a white bear normally, but people ask not to think of a white bear. Once they're allowed to think of it again, they report feeling obsessed with it. So you try to get yourself not to eat something that you really like, that self-denial, I'm going to stop it. That makes you obsess about that particular thing that you're denying yourself even more. There's great research on this. It's called the ironic effects of self-control. And it's one reason why exerting self-control just doesn't work. It backfires.
Yeah, it seems to be the consistent message. I remember seeing a study that I really liked about children, and it gave them, it used like fig Newtons. It used a sweet treat that kids don't necessarily gobble down. It's pretty kind of neutral, not super sweet cookie. And they put they put food out on a table, and then they also took the same cookies, the same fig Newtons, and put them in a jar on a high shelf and said, maybe later. And the kids sort of grazed, but the minute they brought out the forbidden cookies, they were the same cookies. The kids, binged on it, and they'd made it forbidden. They'd made it something, they denied it. And so obviously the kids, all they could think about were the cookies up there. And we see this over and over again in different ways in research, that this sort of denial strategy doesn't really help us change our habits in a positive way.
Yeah. Just because of the way our minds work. It's not a failing that we have. It's not a personal failing. It's just the way our minds work. Yeah.
So let's go through again the steps to forming a good habit. Let's pick something. What would be a good habit? Maybe I wanted to start a meditation practice. What would be a good way to start a daily meditation practice?
Well, you need to find a place and a time where you can repeat that behavior regularly. So I would start by looking at your schedule and trying to figure out, okay, is it before I get up in the morning? Is it when I go to bed at night? When is it that I have that 15 minutes where I can actually get into a meditative state? And then finding ways to make it rewarding. So the rewards of meditation can come more long-term, which is why short-term you may want to do things like do it with a friend, find a place to sit that you really like, that you enjoy, that feels comfortable, that you'd want to go back to again. And then you want to make sure that you do the same thing each time. So you want to structure it in the same way. So you want to make it easy, choose the right environment to make it easy, context. You want to repeat as often as you can in the same way, and you want it to be rewarding in some way so that you will go back and do it again.
So is that our mantra? Are those the three things we need to remember when we set a goal? Context, repetition, and reward?
Yes, yes. And it's not what we typically think of when we think of setting goals. When we set goals for ourselves, we plan, we try to figure out what order we're going to do things in. We think about the reasons why we're going to do things. Instead, habits are much simpler than that. They're just based on the action that you're doing and the learning, how your habit memory learning captures that so that it starts to automate the behavior.
So let's talk about the flip side of this, getting rid of a bad habit. I don't know, what kind of bad habits do people talk about that they want to stop?
Oh, excessive cell phone use.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Um, Eating too much, not exercising, so they don't have an exercise habit. That's more the absence of a good habit. Um, Bad habits are, it would be great if we could make decisions to control our bad habits. But as we were talking a few minutes ago, desire is not something that's easily controlled. So just making a decision to stop doing something is not likely to be effective. And we know that willpower doesn't last long enough to really control our habits. But fortunately, there was we all know a way to control our habits, and we've seen this in action in our lives, and that is with anti-smoking campaigns.
Mhm.
So what anti-smoking campaigns did is first they informed people, right? You should not smoke because of the health risks. That was in the middle of the last century. But then the government did a number of really interesting things to enforce that for people. And one was that they actually removed cigarettes from store shelves so that you have to go ask somebody to buy cigarettes. And you don't see ads reminding you anymore to smoke. They added taxes. Both of those things made it more difficult for you to purchase and to smoke cigarettes. And then finally, many of us live in areas where there are smoking bans in public places, right? You may remember, Tara, that we used to be able to smoke in airplanes, right? There were a couple of seats in the last couple of rows of aircraft, as if the air didn't circulate any more broadly than that. So that's not the case anymore. People have to really think about where to go to smoke. So what the anti-smoking campaigns did and why they were so successful. So they were amazingly successful. If you look at health interventions, anti-smoking is probably that's probably our marquee example of how to make this happen. So smoking rates went from about 50% in the middle of last century now to where they're about 15%. And that's still too high, and it's higher in lower income areas. I mean, it's not a complete win, but it is a really impressive health intervention that we haven't done with other sorts of health issues. And what it did is it removed cues, right? It removed the cues that were activating our smoking and cigarette purchasing. And then it also put something called friction on the behavior, meaning it made it more difficult. Taxes, smoking bans just make it more difficult to smoke. And our habits are very responsive to those sorts of changes, changing the cues so the behavior is no longer activated automatically in your mind, and adding friction that makes the behavior more difficult. So you have to think about what you're going to do.
The first time that you and I talked, I had heard you on a podcast called Hidden Brain. And on that podcast, we told a story about an elevator study and friction. I found it just fascinating. Can you share that now?
Yeah, that is one of my favorite studies too. It was done very early in the 1980s, and I think it's a lovely study because it demonstrates a intervention which is trying to change behavior in just the way most of us try to change our behavior. So the challenge in this study was, how do you get people to take the stairs in a 4-story office building? And the researchers started out putting up signs all over. Take the stairs, it's good for your health. Take the stairs, save energy, good for the environment. All of us believe those things, and it's good to be reminded of them, but they had no effect on people's behavior, had no effect on how often they use the elevator and the stairs in this 4-story office building. So what the researchers did is they delayed the door closing by 16 seconds. So elevator doors take about 10 seconds to close once they start to close. So they added 16 seconds to that. And that is all it took for elevator use to decrease by a third.
Wow.
Adding time is friction. Adding that friction onto elevator use deterred a third of the people from using it. And after the researchers, after a month, they put the speed of the elevator doors back to where they were before, people still kept taking the stairs because that was long enough for them to form that simple habit of taking the stairs instead of fussing with the elevator. So it's a cool study because it demonstrates something with our behavior that we live out whenever we try to make New Year's resolutions, right? We try to bolster, explain to ourselves why we should do things, but more powerful would be actually changing the friction that we're experiencing in our lives.
Since having that conversation, I now ask myself, I look at a situation or something that maybe I'm wanting to change, and I actually ask myself that question, what is the friction here? What is stopping me? What's getting in the way of this? And it's really useful. Sometimes the friction is maybe I didn't like the way my pans were arranged, and the pans were on a high shelf, and it was just too much of a pain to cook. But when I rearranged my kitchen and maybe got some good kitchen gadgets that made life a little easier, it eliminated that friction. It was easier to cook. I think that if we start approaching problems that way, what is the friction? I think it's a really important take home to ask yourself when maybe there's something a habit you want to form and it's not happening. Maybe there's something getting in the way that you aren't seeing or aren't aware. We talked about exercising and your exercise clothes, putting those within reach, right?
Yes, and always having them clean. If you're going to go to the gym, keep a set of clean clothes in your athletic bag, in your car, or by your front door, however you plan to get to the gym. Make sure that it's easy. There's another great study showing that distance is friction. So we said time was friction, taking the stairs. Distance is friction too. People who have to travel further to a gym go less often than people who go to a gym close by. And part of that, the reason for that is if you can integrate going to the gym in your daily schedule, then you are much more likely to be able to just stop by on your way to work, stop by on the way home from the grocery store. It's easier. There's less friction on the behavior. And we're very responsive to friction. Our habits are really responsive to friction. So it's a smart question you're asking yourself.
And I think you told me last time, it's distance, it's time, and it's effort. All those three things. So when you're looking at a situation, is it the distance? No. Is it the time? Maybe. Is it the effort? Is there a way I can make this easier? Those three questions, that whole concept of friction and asking yourself those three questions has personally been very helpful. So I would just encourage people listening to think about that and learn. And you can read a lot more about friction in the book. I think we should get some questions. Christina has asked, how can we break bad habits without going cold turkey on them? Sometimes it feels like we have to completely go cold turkey on a bad habit to keep from falling back into those patterns. So can you talk a little bit about that? Quitting habits cold turkey.
Well, I do think that it's helpful to change the cues to whatever the behavior is. So if you eat ice cream whenever it's in your freezer, change that cue if you can. If you have control over what's in your freezer, don't put ice cream there because you know that that's a cue to you eating when you might not want to. So cold turkey, it's an abstinence model. Unfortunately, that also tends to make people feel like they're denying themselves.
Right.
So it can have those sort of backfiring effects. Instead, I would think about changing the cues so that the behavior doesn't come to mind And so then you don't have to make a decision. I don't want to do this. It's not going to remind you. It's like you're living in an environment where you can't smoke in public places, so it's just easier not to smoke.
Right. Okay. Um, what is the best way to deal with the loss of motivation? This is from Anna. What is the best way to deal with the loss of motivation and keeping up with good habits, which for me tends to happen around day 3, she says. That's very honest of you, Anna.
Exactly. It's not, for most of us, motivation wanes. Once we figure out that what we're trying to do is difficult, it may not feel as fun as what we're used to doing. It may not feel as natural, as normal to you. So that's where, once again, getting back to controlling the environment that you live in so that it makes the behavior that you want easier and the behavior that you don't want more difficult. It's a great study done with eating showing that if people are sitting at a table with a bowl of apple slices right in front of them and a bowl of buttered popcorn that they have to reach for to get, that's one condition. A second condition, buttered popcorn was right in front of people. They had to reach for the apple slices. People actually ate a third fewer calories if the apple slices were close than if the popcorn was close. Again, we are very responsive to friction in ways that we don't really recognize. Most people would say, I'll eat apple slices if I like apple slices. I'll eat popcorn if I like popcorn. It depends on what my taste is or what I want that day. But instead, we're seeing very consistent effects of just putting that distance between you and the food. And it makes it so much easier to eat the healthy thing and eat less of the unhealthy.
It's shocking to me that such a small effort reaching across the table versus that just is really no effort for something that you like that might be delicious to you, that level of friction can make a difference by, you said, a third, right?
Yep, a third fewer calories. Yep.
That is a shocking study. I like that study. Jessica has a good question. How do we break the habit of doom scrolling, of checking in on COVID updates or anything related to the pandemic when it negatively impacts our mental health? I do this every day. I'm going to stop. I'm going to get off Twitter. Twitter is my thing. I'm going to stop looking at all this. Even as a news reporter, I can only take so much, but I always go back. I always tune into the news program. Or how do you break that habit of doom scrolling? That's a hard one, right?
What I recommend is, once again, you put some friction on it. So if you're getting this information from Twitter, then don't automatically log into Twitter. Keep it off your computer or your phone, whatever you use most often. You can just remove it from your screen. I mean, I completely understand this too. We've been through such a difficult time. It's hard not to pay attention to what's going on the TV. But I've insisted in my house that the TV be in the downstairs, which is not where I study and not where I spend most of my time. So my husband can turn it on and I don't get pulled into it to the same extent. I have to walk into that room to see it. So I've tried to put friction between myself in my own life and that doom scrolling thing. It's a real challenge right now, I
But it
think.
might be leaving screens out of your bedroom. Maybe making a deal with yourself that you're not going to get on the iPad until maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. If that's what you do. And maybe it's restricting, saying, okay, I'm going to do this for 30 minutes and then I'm going to set the alarm and I'm going to move on to other things. So it's not total. I think you just have to create some rules for yourself, and something like doom scrolling, because the benefit is so immediate when you stop. I think that might be an easier thing. I know people that I did a phone-free lunch challenge to myself where I started leaving my phone back in the day when we had desk and we went out to lunch with our friends. and I left the phone in my desk at lunch. And it was so great, immediately great, to not have that calling me and just being engaged with my friend at lunch. It was a very easy habit to form. I looked forward to putting that phone in my desk. So sometimes the reward is immediate, right? So it's an easier habit.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great example. Yeah.
So Michael asked, I have a 3-year-old and I want to make sure I instill good habits early as she grows up. Do you have any recommendations for building habits in young children?
What I would say is that young children's neural systems are just not developed in the same way as adults. So kids don't form habits in the same way we do. They're relying more on their environment for structure than the habits they develop within that environment. So so it's really important when you have little kids that you model the right behavior, that you encourage the right behavior. But I don't know that it makes sense to think of it so much in terms of habit, because they're not stuck in the habits they formed in the same way we are. They're still growing, they're developing, they're open to new experiences in ways that we're really not. And that has to do with a developing neural system.
So it seems like the answer is that if you work on your habits, you can form good habits and positive habits, but you're modeling that behavior for your child, and that will help them eventually learn good habits, right?
There you go. Yes.
So Layla asked about the difference between good habits and bad habits. Is it easier to form a good habit or harder to break a bad habit? Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah. People often ask that, and I think that we've learned through watching New Year's resolutions and which ones are most successful, that people find it easier. They're more successful at forming a new habit than they are at breaking old ones. And it doesn't mean it has to be that way, right? It's just that given how we sort of intuitively try to change our behavior, that we're not as good at changing bad habits as we are at forming new ones. It makes more sense to us. Repeat something that's fun, do it in the same way. The idea of changing context, putting friction, that's somehow less intuitively compelling. So, yeah.
So this is a question that seems very relevant for now. How do you restart a good habit, a long-term habit that maybe you've lost interest in or it's fallen off, you haven't been able to sustain it? I think that's happened to a lot of people who maybe had a gym habit or a commuting habit or something before the pandemic, and they're wondering, will I be able to get back to that good habit I used to have?
Yeah, I think that's particularly true with exercise, because that's one effect that the pandemic has had, is it's reduced the amount that most people move. Make sure it's rewarding, make sure you make it easy, and make sure that you're repeating the same behavior. You already have a habit memory trace there for what you were doing before. So you can build on that. You should find it easy to develop this new habit or embrace the old one that you used to have, because that habit memory system will still be there. But you can make sure, now you know how to form a good habit, you can make sure that you're doing all of the things to support that old memory trace by the 3 bases of habit formation. Once we get back to daily life, my fear is that people will fall back into doing what they did before without evaluating whether it was really working for them. So be mindful about what habits you want to take with you from the pandemic.
Now, this is an interesting question from Ahmed. How do we avoid procrastination? As in, I'll start tomorrow, or once I have this, I'll get started. Like, once I get decent cookware, I'll start cooking more. Where does procrastination fit in into sort of some of the obstacles we create for ourselves before starting a new habit?
Well, as you know well, Tara, writing is really hard, and if ever you're going to procrastinate, it's when you're writing a book. But the way really effective writers do it is they have figured out how to structure into their day either a certain number of pages or a certain time that they write. It doesn't always work out, right? So you can't, sorry about this. So you can't always write wonderful sentences. That's not necessarily going to happen. Just accept that. But what you are in control over is your work ethic, your work habits, and you can set that up in ways that we've discussed so that at least you're sitting at your desk and you don't have other apps on your computer, you don't have distractions. You've set it up so that you have a certain time or a certain place where you write. And that helps. So using tricks from people who have been very successful, like I went to Ernest Hemingway's house recently in Key West, Florida, recently, before the pandemic. And he had this amazing studio out the back of his house where he wrote all the time. Just going out there triggered writing. And he was very successful at it, obviously. So that's the kind of thing that you want to think about. It's not controlling the procrastination, it's enabling the work. How do you best do that?
And that falls under context, right? Creating an environment where you can succeed with whatever your goal is. We have a couple questions about memory, habit memory. Angel asked, how should we deal with setbacks? For example, if we've established a good habit for the past couple months, but one day we fall back on the old version, how do we improve on this? The screen just moved. Another person said, how long does a memory habit last? If you worked out 3 times a week and had an injury and couldn't work out for 2 years, that's a long time. Would the memory habit still exist? So can you talk a little bit about memory and habit?
Yeah. So as I said, habit memories are slow to form. They're slow to change. I mean, it's one reason why we say once you learn how to ride a bike, you never really forget. And once you learn how to speak a language, it's only with a great deal of disuse, not using it, that the memory starts to fade. There are some habit researchers who think that habit memories never go away. So once you learn something, it sticks with you forever in that habit memory system. It just, you need to be in the right context to activate it again.
Okay. A lot of questions about reward. I think people are not quite understanding what reward means in the context of especially difficult habits. So can we talk again just about, is a reward a glass of chocolate milk after running? Or is the reward the endorphins after running? Is the reward that instead of running, you play tennis because it's more fun? Can you talk a little bit about reward?
Yeah, we usually think of rewards in terms of monetary rewards, right? Incentives, something you get after a behavior. But for habit formation, those rewards that you get in the future aren't that effective. Instead, they need to be immediate. So it needs to be while you're doing something. And it could be just the emotion you get, the feeling you get. I used to love to run outside just because I would see beautiful places and I'd get to experience the natural environment in ways that I didn't in the rest of my day. So those were rewards for me. And I liked the feeling of being tired immediately afterwards. So rewards can be pretty much anything that makes you feel good. That's a reward, but it needs to be immediate, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with money. Yeah.
I think just reminding ourselves about what part of this we like, about the pleasure, about the way we feel, about being outside. But reward is really going to be what you make it. Oh, it's maybe what you feel like is the reward of that activity. I'm going to give the final question to Suzanne. I like this question. Is it harder for older people to learn new habits? I'm in my 70s. Am I doomed, given that I have repeated some bad habits for 7 decades? So can you teach an old dog new tricks? Tell me about habit formation and aging.
Yeah. So we often think that older people are like you and me, Tara, are stuck in their habits and actually rely more on habits than younger people. Research suggests that's not exactly true because cognitive ability declines generally throughout our brains as we get older. And we're less able to form new habits as we get older than we were when we were younger. And I think what people are observing when they think that older people do stuff out of habit, I think they're observing that we're just not learning new ones. So we're falling back on the old ones because our neural systems are not flexible enough really to form new habits as we go through life in the way that people who are 30 and 40 are able to do, and 20. Um, so I think that it's a complicated answer. The answer is older people aren't as effective at learning new habits, so they may be falling back on older ones more often than younger people. And that's why it looks like they're sort of stuck in this habit circle. More
But
than,
can they change? Is it possible for somebody to change in their older years?
oh, sure. All it is it's more difficult. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just that you have to be kinder to yourself. It's like everything, right? You don't see quite as well as you used to. It takes a little bit longer, perhaps, for you to form a habit.
So give us a final word of encouragement before we leave. If we're struggling with a goal, a new health habit, what would you say? What would be your parting words to keep us on track and keep us, you know, hopeful about the ability to form a new habit?
Well, I would say, in response to your friend who wants to keep doing this sort of, I'm good for a while, I'm bad for a while, I'm good for a while. Focus on the good things because that's where you're going to form habits that are beneficial, and keep focused on that and forgive yourself the bad ones. Your habit memory forgives you. There's nothing different about a good or a bad habit except how well it meets your goals. So keep that in mind and just focus on what you can do today, which is repeating behaviors that are consistent with your goals. That's how you get good habits.
Context, repetition, and reward, and maybe some self-compassion, that reminding yourself it takes time, it takes 66 days at least, and just keep trying, it sounds like.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to encourage everybody watching I have my handy book here, Good Habits, Bad Habits. This is really a great book. If you love science, if you love human behavior, if you want to just understand yourself better, it's a great mix of practical advice and just understanding yourself and how we make decisions, and understanding even, I think, the history of behavioral science. Would you agree? I mean, there's a lot going on in this book. So thank you for writing it, Dr. Wood.
Oh, thank you, Tara. That's lovely. Means a
And
lot from you.
Oh, well, yeah, I really do like it. And I encourage everyone to buy it. I think that the more we think about this, the more we learn about our own behavior and we understand human behavior, we can make the changes that we're trying to make. I mean, that's what this is all about ultimately, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us for this Dornsife dialogue. If you missed any part of it, a recording of it will be posted to the Dornsife Dialogues webpage tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you for your questions. And Dr. Wood, thank you for the work you do for helping us achieve our goals and live healthier lives. So thanks for all you've done and for always being there when I call for a story for the New York Times. I greatly appreciate it.
You're wonderful to talk to, Tara. You always have great questions.
This was fun. We'll do it again. Thanks, everybody.